All right, thanks for that very kind introduction. So I won't take up too much of your time today. I think there's way more interesting talks than talking about, boring old databases and things like that. But this is a good opportunity to just sort of, put a plug in for the Myeloma Canada Research Network as a whole, and sort of bring you up to speed with some of the activities that we've been engaged in, and just sort of highlight the fact that we exist as an entity. I would also take the opportunity to really thank Myeloma Canada as an organization. So without Myeloma Canada and the vision of Aldo Dalcol many years ago, to even go so far as to bring us all into the same room together, back in the days where everybody was sort of toiling away at their own centers, none of what has since transpired would have ever evolved. So, now that the Myeloma Canada Research Network is now its own independent entity, it is not without, a huge track record of collaboration with Myeloma Canada. And as was already pointed out, I think one of the greatest strengths is that ongoing involvement with the patient voice, and to make sure that we're creating an organization that is really Canadian-centric and reflects what we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So. All right. And I also have to thank Dr. McCurdy, who very kindly at the last minute gave me a bunch of these slides, at least from the myeloma, the MCRN standpoint. She's been a strong advocate of raising the profile of the MCRN in our own local institution, trying to generate interests and, most importantly, funds, because none of this happens, unfortunately, without money. But I'll give her credit for a lot of these slides, but it is a team effort. So. Just as a brief bit of background, and I already kind of alluded to it, but the MCRN really did evolve out of some initial meetings that happened probably now close to 15 years ago, again spearheaded by Aldo Dalcol, because there really wasn't an opportunity or a venue for any of us to really get together and chat. There was some strong research that was being done across the country, and Canada has always punched above its weight from a clinical trial standpoint. But we didn't have an opportunity to really make a concerted effort to move the needle forward from a Canadian-centric standpoint. And Aldo was really key in making that happen. And so he organized one of the very first Myeloma Canada scientific roundtables, again, about almost 15 years ago, and that brought together a very small, tightly knit group of physicians. And over the years, that has grown, and you'll see in some of the subsequent slides how much that's grown. But we have now become an independent organization, and we have as a result, we have had to develop some clear vision statements and mission statements. And we've tried to be very practical, develop things that we think are achievable. But in a nutshell, this is what we're trying to do. And the biggest one is really just to transform myeloma research in Canada. Again, really wanted to emphasize the national aspect of that. And towards accelerating a cure. I think, we still talk about making myeloma a chronic disease, and we've made some incredible strides towards that point. But I think it's important to not lose sight of the fact that the ultimate goal, the holy grail for all of us, is to actually get rid of this disease entirely. And so we want to always keep that at the forefront and remember that that is the ultimate goal. To do that, and to that end, we need to develop, innovative trials, and we want to be able to develop these trials in a way, again, that affects the Canadian patients. We want to have a plethora of trials, all the way from really early drug development, cool immune therapy stuff that Dr. Neri has talked about earlier today, all the way up to the big phase 3 trials, and to really take advantage of the expertise that we have locally to design these things. We want to be able to combine that with a lot of the translational efforts, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. As I've mentioned, Canada is really a world leader in a lot of areas in the field of myeloma, and we should be celebrating that and incorporating that into all of our future studies. And we want to do that to improve patient outcomes, not only in myeloma, but also in some of the related diseases. So things that are near and dear to my heart, like amyloidosis, related condition to multiple myeloma, and then some of the very weird and wonderful conditions that are out there as well that we can't lose sight of. We really wanted to develop a correlative research platform that not only involves patient outcomes, this is the database that we'll speak about a little later, but also national biobanking opportunities, and again, just capitalizing on the translational and scientific networks that we have. Most importantly, we want to make sure that we get all of this great information out there. We want to be able to publish and present and be a very high-profile organization on the international scale, because I think we can do that, and we already do that, but it's important to have a forum within which to celebrate that. So this is the network now. It's a little bit small, but that's because the network is big. It spans the whole country. We have excellent representation across every single province. It represents all of the main myeloma academic centers across the country. And we presently have about 11 centers, that's the core group. It's actually now we're looking to add another 19 centers to the organization, to the whole network. And what I think is really cool is that we're starting to see some of these smaller centers come up. Kelowna, Burnaby, some of the smaller places in Ontario and in Quebec. And I think this is crucial because we don't want to just reflect the work that's being done in the big houses, so to speak. We want to have representation at the level of some of the community centers, because that's where all of the action ultimately happens. And we need to be able to engage not only patients but also clinicians, nurses, pharmacists at those levels. And it's also an opportunity to start to engage them from a clinical trial standpoint. It's been a great barrier to getting these cutting-edge therapies into many patients' hands and many patients' lives, because they just don't live in close proximity to a major center. But if we can start to develop these strong networks and research networks and create that infrastructure that's required, we hope to be able to broaden out that effort. So this is really quite exciting to be poised to activate another 19 more centers to bring them online. As I mentioned before, we used to be just used to be the Wild West. It was just a bunch of researchers and clinicians that would get into the room and chit-chat about myeloma, and then we'd disappear. But now we have to be organized. We have responsibilities now. We have to have things like a board of directors. We have to have board meetings, which is super exciting. And I'm on the board, along with a number of my other colleagues. But importantly, I think we have a really good cross-section of people involved in this network. Not only do we have us physicians, but we have nurses, we have patients. We have patients also that are very educated. Dr. Tavroulis, PhD trained. She keeps us honest all the time, which we definitely appreciate. And incredible patient advocates too, and they really do help to maintain that patient voice, keeps us honest, and keeps us focused to make sure that when we do, look at a trial or a new initiative, that voice is heard there. So I think it's a really well-balanced board, and we hope to keep that ethos regardless of who is on the board. Even more importantly than the Board of Governors, we like to think we're important, but we're not really. This is the key team. I really would be remiss to not mention people like Engin Gall, who keep the whole operation afloat. Without Engin, we would be a mess, to be honest. He single-handedly has launched many of our clinical trials, has moved things through to generate the funds that we require and negotiate with our pharma and other academic partners. He's really an incredible force there. Esther Massikan, we've got to get a photo of Esther in here, but she is key to keeping the whole database component afloat as well, and really is my partner in crime with the database being one of my main interests in the organization. But again, without her, we wouldn't be able to collect now up to 6,000 patients worth of data and maintain that data. And then Julia Dobbins and Mole Fu, both really integral in helping manage all of the active trials and active data that we have moving through the organization. Now, we are an independent entity, and we can run a clinical trial from start to finish now, which is quite remarkable and a far cry from where we were even just 5 years ago. So this takes a lot of work, and these are the people that really keep that running. Not to mention all of the other outsourced work that we have to do, engaging biostatisticians, legal counsel. Now we got to get lawyers involved. Like, we're a really serious thing now. So, bookkeeping, keeping the funds afloat. As I said, this is it's an expensive endeavor to get into the myeloma world, but we've had some great and very generous partners to help us along the way. These are the key platforms or key pillars that keep us interested. We want to have homegrown clinical trials and the capabilities to do these trials. And as I keep reiterating, to do these trials from a Canadian-centric standpoint, celebrating the expertise that we have here. The national database, I'll talk a little bit about that later, just because I'm up here and I have the microphone, so I can talk about whatever I want, I guess. But the national database has been, I think, really important as far as benchmarking where we are at in this country with this disease, with the agents that we have available, and it's really helped inform where we would like to go. And then something that's been talked about for many years, but I think is now slowly coming to fruition, is a national biobank. So as we are beginning to do more and more of these clinical trials that are homegrown, they are Myeloma Canada Research Network trials, we're developing a bank of tissue and a bank of genetic information that go along with these trials to help inform this disease. And this is an important resource because not only is it applicable to the study that generated that little sample, but may also become important later on as we revisit new ideas that allow us to go and validate with stored samples. As a national biobank, with how technology works nowadays, we don't need a freezer in one single person's lab anymore. Nowadays, with the network of people that we have and the ability to inventory all of these different samples, we can create a network of these biobanks around, but linked again through the Myeloma Canada Research Network. I've got my 10-minute warning, so I'm not going to go through every single one of these goals, but these are the things that really help motivate us. We want to be able to be nimble. We want to be able to rapidly take ideas and implement them. We want to be cost efficient, but also cost effective. We want to be able to, again, I really want to emphasize the idea of integrating the correlative biology into all this. Again, the Canadian scientists that we have are really punching way above their weight, and to celebrate, or not to celebrate that would be a big waste for us. And then I think the last one is something that Donna Reese often comes to. We want to be highly relevant, but we want to be lean and we want to be nimble. I think that's a very Canadian way to do it because, it's difficult with our fixed income as a national healthcare system to do it any other way. Just to highlight some successes. So the MCRN as a whole formally started only a few years ago. Informally, it's probably been around for, I would say, the better part of the last 10 years. But we didn't really kick off with any significant clinical trials till around 2012, 2013, and that was with Dr. Reese's MCRN-001 trial, which really helped to kind of benchmark lenalidomide maintenance along with a novel way of doing a transplant. But one of the key things, sort of highlighting some very important successes here, this trial was launched at a time where lenalidomide maintenance was not funded in any province. So it was a way for us to be able to provide what is now an established standard of care much earlier for patients than they otherwise would have. Dr. Neri probably spoke about the selinexor story. So this is a trial that we were able to do in partnership with a small pharmaceutical company that has now become quite an interesting story, but because of the relationships that our Canadian researchers had with this company, we were able to be one of the leading figures in the development of this drug. Some other homegrown studies here with the use of carfilzomib. Now some novel ways of looking at daratumumab, a very Canadian way of using that drug. All of these trials, 1 to 4, are all finished accrual. And so we are now in the process of analyzing these things, and the data that's starting to come out, I think, will be practice-changing, and certainly practice-changing in the Canadian landscape. And then we have this plethora of other studies that are in the midst of imminently being activated, if not already activated, like the BCMA trial, and a number of other things, even things like very practical studies, like a more rapid way of infusing daratumumab. I'm sure anybody in this room that's on daratumumab really does not like the, sometimes up to 6-7 hour infusions. And there are some protocols that we're testing this down to a 90-minute infusion. So very practical trials, again, nimble, cost-effective type studies. So. And we are good at enrolling. This is just to celebrate our successes. These are just curves about how quickly can we get patients on. The dotted curves are what we would expect for enrollment. for our 003 trial, we were pretty much bang on. The 004 study, actually, we out-accrued. We got patients on much faster than we ever thought, and the 009 trial that's ongoing is going very well. And then just the translational expertise, just to highlight all of the cool things we can do. We've got great researchers in this country that do genomic stuff, drug target validation, immunotherapy. MRD testing is something that we're actively interested in. So probably have, 5 minutes left? Not even? All right. Oh, okay, 7 minutes. All right, good. So I do want to spend just the last couple minutes just talking about the database. I don't know how many of you have heard me give a database talk before, but this is the very much abbreviated version. We wanted to put this whole clinical database together because, again, we had very few tools in Canada to benchmark how we are doing with this disease, how we do with the treatments available to us in Canada, and also to identify gaps in care. So this is one of the reasons that we wanted to be able to do it. And we wanted to also be able to take advantage of all the things that we do in Canada, which is very homogenized compared to the US. We're told by the powers that be what drugs are available, what drugs are funded. But this actually is an advantage to us because many patients are treated very similarly, and so we have these big cohorts of patients that we can see how they do over time. So we wanted to take advantage of that. We needed to develop a tool for that, though, and needed to develop a very user-friendly platform, data entry platform that could be used irrespective of the site. Had to be a tool that could be used to log all the retrospective data that we have and looking at a legacy cohort, but also a tool that could be used prospectively, looking at new patients coming down the pipe, and to start to incorporate that into our routine practice. Like the MCRN as a whole, the database also has a bit of a governance structure. This is precious data that we're looking after, and we want to use it responsibly. This is your data as patients. We want all the privacy to be protected. We want you to know that the data is being used by very good stewards of it, and that it's used in a way that is representative of the Canadian experience, not just the Ontario or the Alberta experience. So, and this is the platform for anybody that's keen. We can talk about this later, but it looks pretty cool. Most importantly, it's very user-friendly, and it is web-based. It's all password protected, housed on the Princess Margaret servers. But coming up next week, in fact, actually, we will have our first database coordinators meeting, and this is a really crucial thing for us because it's the data entry people and the data managers that we really want to celebrate here. We want them to be engaged and to be involved over the very long term of this project. So this is quite exciting to even have something like this to be able to engage people with. These are all the sites that are currently activated. We are almost getting ready to get Windsor on board, but there's a few little hiccups. But pretty much we were represented again by all of the major provinces, all the major centers, and we have interest from a whole bunch of other people to bring them online as well. So we're slowly expanding this out. This is actually the last quarterly report, at which point we had close to 5,000 patients. I've just received the next quarterly report because we have our database steering committee meeting next week at the CCTG meeting here in Toronto. But now the total number of patients enrolled in this study is up to 6,000, and that goes back about 10 years. And as the interest is gaining, we're definitely poised to continue that on. We will hopefully have close to 10,000 patients over the next few years, which is one of the largest myeloma registries in the world. And so that's all you guys. And one of the biggest advantages we have over the other repositories of data, like insurance company data and things like that, is that we can track the patients throughout their entire myeloma journey because of the way and then the centers that are involved in the study. So this is extremely robust data that will prove to be incredibly invaluable to us going forward. And I won't get into the nitty-gritty of all the things that we highlight here, but it really is quite comprehensive, and pretty much every organization, company, whoever that we peddle this out to help generate some interest and, most importantly, funds, they're incredibly impressed with the scope that we've taken on. So we have asked some questions, and finally, last few times I've given this talk, I've never really been able to give you any answers, but we've asked some very important questions, and now we're finally getting some data out, and I think some very important benchmarking data. We've been able to demonstrate what are the outcomes for transplant-ineligible patients in Canada. This was led by my colleague in Calgary, Dr. Victor Zepeda. Hopefully, very soon we'll be presenting our experience in Canada with lenalidomide maintenance. So this was a big deal back in the day when lenalidomide came to be in the maintenance setting. It was a difficult decision for many of the funders too, because it's an expensive endeavor. But I think what we'll hopefully be able to show is actually that the outcomes that we have in Canada were worth it, and that are very much in keeping with the clinical trial data. We have a number of other important questions to ask, which is things like what happens after you relapse on lenalidomide-based therapies? How well are we doing in managing those patients? Because they do pose a bit of a conundrum. Second, transplants. We have this very cool translational study with Tony Ryman, supported by the Terry Fox Research Institute, really trying to be one of the most comprehensive studies in how we follow myeloma patients, right on down to the genomic, immunotherapy, or immunologic niche and minimal residual disease testing initiative. So this is a really cool study that's ongoing and is a prospective study. And then a smattering of other things and a whole plethora of questions that we'll have to field next week too when the steering committee meets. We've got some deadlines coming up. I won't go into this, but nonetheless, just to highlight that this work is ongoing, and now that we know what we have, we're able to start to generate and get this data out and available in a more public forum very quickly. So lastly, just what's coming in 2019. Most importantly, again, I guess I'm a little bit selfish in this respect, but there is going to be a protocol amendment to start to encompass some of the other weird and wonderful diseases like amyloidosis and other plasma cell dyscrasias. And I think we have a role to play in looking at the weird and wonderful, not just the really common. We have already exceeded the target of 6,000 patients, so I have to update this slide and maybe to go for 7,000 or 8,000 by the end of 2019. Hopefully have another 2 additional sites to contribute data formally over the next year, and then we need a plan to incorporate probably another half a dozen sites. We would also like to be able to increase the support to each site for the data coordinators. Right now we fund only about 0.2 of a job at each site, but with more funds available we'd be able to bolster that a little bit more and really make myeloma a celebrated disease at these cancer institutions. We've got a few more sponsored studies coming on board, and again, highlighting this second to last point, which is the tutorial and database meeting for our coordinators. We want to celebrate them as the real champions for this. So, and that's about it. I'll close with that, and I'm happy to take any questions about the database or the group.
Dr. Venner, I think there's a lot of interest, but unfortunately,
I'm too long-winded.
One or two questions? All right. Yes, Norma. You need a microphone. No, Norma, please. You need a microphone.
Oh, there we go. Maybe I'm missing the boat on this elementary question. Can patients access this database? And the reason, I'll give you an example. Like for instance, if I want to know results for, let's say, an IGIV. Now, maybe that's a supplementary supporting treatment. I don't know if you're there yet in inputting results. Like if I want to look up to see how many patients in Canada have had severe reactions to it, or it's not supporting, or let's take it to chemo treatment that we're on. Can we access that to study? Because, for decision making, this is really critical for us.
That's a very good question, and the way that I would answer that is the same way I would answer J&J if they came to me with the same kind of question. We have very strict criteria because we have to be good stewards of this data. We have to be able to vet these types of questions in a way that is going to generate data that is meaningful, that is accessible, and also, most importantly, that we actually have. Sometimes a very good question, it's nonetheless a good question, but we just haven't captured that data yet in the database. So with that in mind, we do have the steering committee and the whole governance structure behind it. The way that questions are posed to the database is that anybody can come to us as the MCRN Canadian Myeloma Database Organization with a question. We have applications and things for that. And then those applications would be vetted by the steering committee group to see if this is a feasible question for us to answer. It seems like it should be as simple as just saying, oh, why don't we just like pull all the IVIG patients and then just find all of the reactions. But unfortunately, that's not something that you can just do in a weekend. That's a process that would take 6 months, 12 months to be able to do. And it's the same for any of the other questions that we have posed and other researchers have posed. So it's a difficult one, but I wouldn't dissuade anybody, especially from a patient standpoint, from asking those questions and figuring out a way to be involved.
So who is the contact person? Like, I almost thought of calling you, Dr. Venner. I know you started this, and I thought I need a question really answered that my doctor maybe that's a second opinion that I'm talking about. But, you know, I just thought, oh, if you're collecting all this information.
Yep, I mean, I think that there are ways that you can reach out through Myeloma Canada and through the steering committee. There's many members that sort of wear two hats that are in this audience, so that would be a good way to do it. Also through your own local physician. So given the breadth of the MCRN network now, many of the physicians that treat myeloma are part of our network, and they can all be champions of these questions. So.
Okay, we have time for one short question, please.
Very good question. The question is, who pays for all this? And I would say, I'll break that down from an MCRN as a whole, and also the database. This is a very complex question. We are funded through a variety of ways. Myeloma Canada has been a major supporter of the MCRN as the MCRN has evolved, and cannot underemphasize the importance of that relationship. This is the way that we can move forward together and to keep that patient voice involved. And you do a remarkable job of raising money, not only for your own organization as Myeloma Canada, but much of those funds come to us, and we were the grateful recipients of it. Pharma is a huge supporter for us, partly through the clinical, standard clinical trial funding as they fund investigator-initiated trials, but they also do donate to us for these database-type initiatives. If we have questions that are of mutual interest, sometimes our pharma colleagues will help get that question over the line and make sure that can be answered. We are trying to explore as many other opportunities as we can. Other big grants, so the TFRI grant, the M4 study, the Terry Fox Research Institute sponsored study is a great example of that. So that's a $2 million grant, so much of which is funding myeloma or MCRN researchers anyway. But it becomes very complicated, and it's not something that we just have this, big pool of cash that keeps us afloat. This is, at the moment, it's a pretty nimble organization, and very much on a bit of a thread string budget right now. But we just need to be able to raise the voice of the MCRN as an entity as a whole, and to maintain the dialogue with you guys, and you guys can be a great advocate for us to wave the flag for all the cool things that we can do and would like to do in the future. And hopefully we can start to partner more on very specific initiatives, trying to raise money for a trial or a specific database question or things like that. So that's what we'd like to do.
Dr. Venner, are you able to stay for lunch or for a while this afternoon?
I'm able to stay for a little bit, but I do have to catch a flight, unfortunately.
Okay.
Back to the snowy climate. It snowed 25 centimeters yesterday at home, so
Wow.
I'd prefer to stay here.
It's a diverse country, but thank you for doing that. But most importantly, thank you for your tremendous presentation. It's been very encouraging, the work of the MCRN and the database, and thank you personally for all your contributions
No problem.
for us.
Thank you. Well, thanks to Myeloma Canada as well. Thank you.